Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Gene Simmons is back in the news. Musician, entrepreneur, bassist, vocalist for American hard rock heavy metal crew Kiss. And if you know who Gene Simmons is, you probably also know that over the course of the last decade, he has made it his life's mission to continuously insist that rock and roll is finally truly dead. And the reason why it's dead, well, obviously it's because of the kids. It's because they don't know rock and roll. It's because rock and roll isn't what it used to be. They won't get off my lawn. They won't get off the internet. Blah, 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 blah. That's a somewhat crude oversimplification of his arguments, but it is unironically also kind of what he's arguing. There's literally a billion different interviews and comments that we could probably focus on and dissect today. But I want to specifically focus on some more recent podcast appearances and such. One from the Zach Kuhn Show, the other from the Bill O'Reilly Show. First up, as Blabbermouth transcribes on December 1st, Gene Simmons said on the Zach Kuhn Show that rock is still dead, specifically saying that from 1958 until 1988, that's 30 years, what came during that period? Well, we had Elvis Presley, we had the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, all that, Pink Floyd, the solo artists, David Bowie, and just music that lasts forever, we'd like to think. In the disco world, you had Madonna, more heavy guitars, you had, oh god, AC/DC and everybody else, Aerosmith, and on, and you had Motown at the same time, you had Prince. It was a very rich musical menu. It could go up and down. You had prog bands. You had Yes, Genesis, Gentle Giant, and you had the heavy bands, Led Zeppelin. And from 1988 until today, it's something like almost 40 years, certainly 35 years. Who are the new Beatles? When host Zach Kuhn mentioned Nirvana, Gene said, "Stop, we are blinded, I'm a major fan. If you walk down the street and ask a 20-year-old who's the bass player in Nirvana, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. Or can you sing a Nirvana song? No. The Beatles, and to slightly lesser extent the Stones and Elvis, everybody knew the Beatles." And more recently, as transcribed by Yahoo News, Kiss's Gene Simmons says that entitled, freckled-faced kids killed rock music. Oh boy, I can practically taste the sad, angry, whiny boomer vibes here. In an interview with conservative pundit Bill O'Reilly, Jesus Christ, talk about a nightmare blunt rotation, the 75-year-old rocker, in addition to addressing the fate of the music industry, discussed his decision to record music for a recent Ronald Reagan biopic and agreed with O'Reilly that Donald Trump is a rock star. Ew. Ugh, I don't even want to touch that. Let's focus on the matter at hand. As Gene Simmons says, unfortunately the business model is dead and new bands don't have a chance, especially rock bands. In a certain way, rock is finally dead, rock and roll is dead because the freckle-faced kid next door to you, who is a good kid with a good family and everything, has become entitled, feels entitled to be able to download and file share and get all of his music for free. Alright, so the gist of these arguments here is that since 1988, there have been no big, influential, iconic, and popular bands. File sharing and the internet and streaming has ruined everything. And also, those damn kids. Grrr, those damn kids. Let's start with the whole there are no new bands argument. This is silly. The idea that since 1988 there has been absolutely nothing in rock music that has mattered, that is influential, that is popular, that has made money is absolutely ridiculous. And honestly, I think on some level Gene knows that this is just objectively incorrect and a bad argument, because he was very quick to shut Zach up when Zach dared to mention Nirvana. Nirvana may not be active right now, but in the time in which they were active, they were incredibly influential and incredibly important and incredibly popular. And despite the fact that they are not an active band, they remain all of those things many a year later. Nevermind continues to sell like a motherfucker. Nirvana continues to inspire tons of brand new rock bands, continues to inspire children to pick up guitars and bass guitars and drumsticks and microphones and such, and make their own rock and roll jams. And it's not just Nirvana. Since 1988, we have seen rock bands continue to thrive and release massive records and tour the world and win awards and be extremely popular and successful and influential and important. Bands such as, Metallica, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the Smashing Pumpkins, Stone Temple Pilots, Weezer, Green Day, Radiohead, Fall Out Boy, Blink-182, Korn, Pantera, System of a Down, Type O Negative, Slipknot, Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, The Strokes, The Killers, The Black Keys, The White Stripes, Paramore, Foo Fighters, Avenged Sevenfold, Greta Van Fleet, Ghost, Falling in Reverse. The list goes on and on. I don't like Falling in Reverse. I don't like them at all. I just named their new album, Popular Monster, the worst metal album of the year. But credit where it's due. They got a ton of huge hit singles. They're a big fucking deal right now. They are inarguably the biggest fucking rock band in the world right now. And you've had so many huge movements too, which all inspired new subgenres of metal music. I mean, in the 90s alone, you had grunge and groove metal, nu metal. You had pop punk and alternative rock really come into the mainstream as well. And that continued well into the early 2000s. Plus now you also had this kind of garage rock, indie rock kind of scene coming up. You had the new wave of American heavy metal and a ton of like melodic metalcore bands, which in turn also was heavily inspired by other movements like the Swedish death metal scene, the Gothenburg melodic death metal scene, which also was huge, is huge. It gave us massive bands like In Flames, Arch Enemy, and Amon Amarth, who continue to be very successful. They're filling massive fucking venues and selling tons of fucking records. And even into the early 2010s, we kind of have this massive push, this new wave of like indie alt-rock bands, you know, like Foster the People, Arcade Fire. We saw a little bit of a classic rock revival push of sorts too, with bands like Rival Sons and Monster Truck and the Glorious Sons, with the obvious big gun here being Greta Van Fleet, who are a genuinely really popular band. They've won Grammy Awards and they play massive fucking shows and do massive fucking tours. And even if there's no like easily defined kind of rock movement happening right now, we are seeing a lot of rock and punk and alt and extreme music come more and more into the mainstream. We've seen Ed Sheeran, a guy who has in the past collaborated with Bruno Mars and Taylor Swift, collaborate with Bring Me the Horizon. We've seen Megan Thee Stallion, who in the past has collaborated with Cardi B, collaborate with Spirit Box, bringing these bands to totally brand new audiences and elevating their platform. And you know what? I'm actually going to retract my previous statement. There is kind of a movement and momentum of sorts for like weirder, more experimental, post-punk, indie rock kind of bands, you know? Think about like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who are constantly switching things up, and they're a massive fucking band. Or like bands like Fontaines DC, Idols, Black Midi and Black Country New Road. Okay, I guess not Black Midi, they're not a band anymore. But Jordy Creep is around, and that Jordy Creep record was a big fucking record, really popular, got a couple songs and went kind of viral for memey TikTok reasons, but nevertheless. God, come to think of it, we even had like a pop punk revival because of like Machine Gun Kelly. Another artist I don't like, but hey, credit where it's due. Mainstream Sellout was a big fucking record. And the only way that you don't see all of this and recognize all of this is by straight up not paying attention. Straight the fuck up. The argument that rock is dead and that it's been dead since 1988 and there's no new bands, no big cool new bands, requires you to be ignorant to everything that has happened in rock music since then. And he is ignorant to modern rock and everything that has happened within rock, punk, alt, and metal and extreme music over the course of the past 40 years is because he's ignorant. Straight up. He doesn't care. And he doesn't care because it's not the music he grew up with. It's not the music that he played when Kiss were at their commercial peak, when they were at their most relevant point ever in the 70s and 80s. Therefore, it's bad. It's not the music he grew up with. It's not the music he plays. Therefore, it's not relevant. Rock is dead. It's pure old man logic, straight up. Back in my day, we had the good music, and now we have the bad music. Wah, wah, wah. And this other part of the argument, too, where it's like, oh, well, if you walked up to a random 20-year-old and asked them who the bassist of Nirvana was, they wouldn't be able to give you an answer. That's also fucking stupid. It's also an insane scenario. Like, in this scenario, Gene Simmons, a 75-year-old man, is just walking up to 20-year-olds in the street and harassing them with questions about Nirvana. Name one song. Name their bassist. Like, I don't know, man, call me crazy, but if I'm just, like, minding my business, running errands, going for a nice little walk, I don't know, and some fucking guy runs up to me, asking me, begging me to name one Nirvana song, or begging me to tell him who the bassist of Nirvana is, I'm gonna tell him to fuck right off. Also, so what? Like, so what? Oh no, some random person would not hypothetically be able to name the bassist in Nirvana. So what? Like, does this matter? Does this somehow change the fact that Nirvana is an absolutely massive and influential band? I don't think it would. Like, that's just fundamentally so fucking silly. And Gene repeatedly brings up the Beatles, too. He asks, who are the new Beatles? He's done this in previous interviews and features in the past, where he's like, who's the next Beatles? Who's the next Bob Dylan? Who's the next big, mega rock star band? And what Gene doesn't understand is in order for there to be a new Beatles, the entire infrastructure and history of music needs to change. In order for there to be a next new Beatles, the previous Beatles would have to no longer exist. We would have to live in a world where the Beatles no longer exist in order for a band to fill that space and do what the Beatles did. And Gene knows this because he was there. He was a young man when the Beatles were releasing their most iconic and influential works, when the Beatles were at the peak and height of their fame. He knows that there is no band quite like the Beatles. He knows that almost every subgenre of rock music can be traced back to at least one song from the Beatles. And he also knows that if he acknowledges this, his argument falls apart yet again. Once again, in order for a band to be as successful, as influential, as famous, and as popular as the Beatles, that band would have to live in a world where the Beatles did not exist and therefore did not do everything that they did. Like, the Beatles straight up revolutionized rock and pop music, Gene. They were the first real rock band. And you know this. Stop being stupid. Alright, now let's address the other part of Gene's argument, finally. We spent a lot of time on the whole no new bands thing. He's talking about streaming, file sharing, the internet, downloading music, social media, blah, 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 blah. Again, his words, in a certain way, rock is finally dead. The freckled kid feels entitled to be able to download and file share and get all of this music for free. Now, Gene Simmons in the past has talked a lot about how streaming services and about how, file sharing services and websites and such have fundamentally hurt rock music and the music industry as a whole. And on this point, I'll be honest, he's right. The way that he's wording it makes him sound like an angry boomer just yelling at children on the internet. But the fundamental argument is, it has merit, okay? It has merit, straight up. It is a well-documented fact that the average pop rock band or artist, even the megastars, simply do not make a lot of money on streaming services. As the Reg Review reported earlier this year, artists on average are paid less than 1/10 of a cent per stream on Spotify. Although Spotify tripled in value during the COVID-19 pandemic, it did not increase payout to artists. And meanwhile, Spotify's CEO, Daniel Ek, is just cashing in left and right. Spotify co-founder and CEO Daniel Ek has sold another $28 million in spot stock, bringing his total share sale this year to $248.3 million so far. That's an insane amount of money. None of that is going to the artists that you love and that you listen to on Spotify. And that's just on that platform. That's not including other platforms like YouTube Music, Apple Music, whatever the fuck else. And this ain't new. I mean, I remember back in the day when you had, like, LimeWire and the Pirate Bay, and, like, I remember, like, going to, like, sketchy websites to illegally download MP3s to put them on my giant fucking iPod brick. I remember when Lars Ulrich was getting really pissy about this kind of stuff, and a lot of people made fun of him. In retrospect, he was kind of right. And I also remember a few years back when musicians went to Capitol Hill and lobbied to Congress talking about how much their residuals suck, talking about how much streaming services take from them. Like, once again, this article, artists on average are paid less than 1/10 of a cent per stream on Spotify. 1/10 of a cent per stream on Spotify. To give you an idea of what that really looks like, Peter Frampton paid a visit to Capitol Hill where he lobbied members of Congress on behalf of performance rights organization ASCAP as part of its Stand With Songwriters Advocacy Day. Addressing what many songwriters see as an inequitable and unjust royalty system, Frampton says, "For all the streaming companies that played Baby I Love Your Way some 56 million times, I got $3,000. That's not even going to cover the mortgage payment." And by the way, not to get political or anything, but the federal government is also at fault here. As Frampton goes on to describe, the marketplace has changed rapidly and the work of all American songwriters is completely undervalued. We're the most regulated small business there is. 70% of what we earn as songwriters is regulated by the federal government. There isn't any other artistic industry that's regulated like that. The consent decrees are outdated. They began in 1941 and the last update was in 2001. These are the things we need changed and updated. It's not so much for me anymore, it's for new songwriters who are coming along. Otherwise, who wants to be a songwriter? Jeans' argument that file sharing services and streaming services have disrupted how the music industry works and have fundamentally changed it and damaged it, that's true. That has merit. Again, he's phrasing it like a cranky old man, and I also now think it's odd that he never really mentions the corporate greed aspect of it, but nevertheless, the argument does have merit. But also, this doesn't to me mean that rock is dead. Because again, there are so many bands out there doing so many different things. Yes, it's harder for them to succeed, but it's not as if it was especially easy to begin with. The record industry has always been a cruel and cold and fickle mistress. Media changes all the time, formats change all the time, and it's hard to adapt. You know, back in the day, vinyl was the main thing that people bought. And then it was CDs, and for a brief period people tried to do like Laserdisc kind of shit, and there was also Walkmans and cassettes and shit. And then you had iPods, and then you had, MP3s were the big thing, and that's where platforms like iTunes came in, and that's what paved the way for LimeWire and the Pirate Bay and like torrents and illegal MP3s and shit. And now you have Spotify and Apple Music. It changes all the time. What people like and what people want from music also changes all the time. The messages that they want to hear in music, the politics, the sound overall. 1 minute glam metal is the next big thing, and the next it's fucking alternative rock, and the next it's boy bands. The key to success consistently, be it 1958 or 2024, is the ability to adapt and just be honest and make great music. Don't get me wrong, it would absolutely help if things were better regulated, and it would absolutely help if Spotify was actually paying the artists, but still, we have seen artists continue to thrive in this time and in this era despite all of that. It's difficult, but not impossible. And not to sound corny, but at the end of the day, I also think that the overall creativity and the quality of the music itself is more important than necessarily how many records we sell. And that kind of brings us to the next argument, blaming the kids. They don't get it. Here's the thing. Gene, you're old. You love the music of the 60s and 70s and 80s because that's what was happening when you were younger. When you were in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. When you were a successful musician. You still are, don't get me wrong. You are. But the 70s and 80s Kiss is where Kiss is at its most relevant and impactful. And that's why that era of music is more important to you. You have nostalgia for it. You have a fondness for it. That's where you made your money, your bread and butter. And that's why you don't recognize what's happening right now as real rock. That's why you argue that rock is dead. Because Kiss, while still successful, has never really done well with a truly modern market. Your audience is dying off. Your audience is primarily older people, the people from your generation. And it's partially your own fault, because realistically, what has Kiss done for a modern audience, aside from exist and belittle them? What have you done? Kiss never released a new album in like 10, 15 years before they retired. They never brought any new bands out with them on tour. And now you're getting ready to invest millions of dollars into some Kiss Avatar band, which I don't think young people are really going to care for. Like, I know it's a stretch, but I genuinely feel like that's a part of the problem. Gene doesn't like modern music, and he thinks that rock is dead because he has had trouble connecting to this modern audience and to modern rock music. And because of that, he's done nothing to help and support rock music over the years, which also supports his argument that rock is dead and no one's supporting it. Like, oh, the record companies aren't doing anything to help bands. You have the money and the resources and the influence to start a record label and change that. To start an agency or something, or a PR company and change that. Why haven't you? Oh, streaming services, file sharing, blah, blah, blah. Why weren't you on Capitol Hill with Peter Frampton? What have you done to advocate for the rights of songwriters and musicians to get their fair share? Instead, you go to conservative-leaning news outlets and podcasts and such, and you just whine and moan about how the kids just don't get it. Grr, the internet. Grr, rock is dead because it's not the rock I grew up with. Only the rock that I grew up with is real rock. Back in my day, we had real rock and roll. Everyone knew the bassist in Fleetwood Mac. Very simply put, the argument that rock is dead, first off, requires you to be ignorant to everything that has happened in rock music since 1988 and including today. And it also requires you to do nothing when rock music and when the music industry as a whole is genuinely struggling at the hands of corporate greed. Maybe the issue isn't rock music. Maybe the issue isn't that rock is dead or dying or whatever. Maybe the issue isn't that there isn't a next new Beatles. Maybe the issue isn't kids who are entitled. Grr, those damn kids. Maybe the issue is you, Gene. Just a thought. I don't know. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy who has a channel actually trying to highlight really cool modern music all the time. Specifically metal music, but hey, that counts. That's within the rock spectrum. Hey, speaking of, by the way, if you're not subscribed, do so already. Check out other videos. We've already done our top 10 end of the year content push, and I'm pretty happy with the response to all of that. Remember, rock is alive, and it's good, and it's great, and maybe not as big as it used to be, but, you know, it's still kicking. And I don't give a shit what these old people say. I'ma keep kicking. I hope you do too. I hope you have a great day. Make sure to listen to lots of great post-1988 rock music. Have a fucking awesome day. I love you. Yeah! Go fuck yourself, Gene Simmons, you crusty boomer bitch.